Hello and welcome to an introduction to science fiction. The goal today is to leave with an understanding of what science fiction is and what it's good for. The first step is to stop and think about what you already know about science fiction. So take a minute and stop the video and ask yourself these three questions. First, what do you already know about science fiction? Second, what science fiction movies, TV shows, or books, or other stories have you heard or seen of before? And then third, do you like science fiction? Why or why not? When we think about what we already know before we start learning something new, it makes it that much easier to remember what we've just learned. So after you're done answering those questions, just turn the video back on and we'll get started. So now in your notes, I need you to write these three questions. Make sure you leave enough room between them to write the answers though. First, what is genre? The second question is what is fiction? And the third question is what is science fiction? We're going to watch a short video which should answer all three of those questions. So take a minute and make sure you have those questions written down before you start the video again.
Genre. Now that's a fun word to say. Genre. Is that French? Do you know what a genre is? A genre is a category. When you like movies, you don't always like every kind or every genre of movie. You might love comedy movies, but not scary ones. Well, those are two different types or genres of movie. We put other things into genres. We might split our building sets into different categories, like, say, I don't know, space, castle, city. Well, books work the same way. Most chapter books are part of a large genre called fiction. And that just means those books tell a story that came from the author's imagination. But fiction alone doesn't tell us many details about what's in the book. So we divide books up into more specific fiction genres. Harry Potter and Charlotte's Web are both fiction books, but they have very different settings and characters, so we put them into different fiction genres. Let's talk about one specific fiction genre right now. You know those books that have spaceships and robots and aliens and time travel, stuff like that? We call those kind of stories science fiction, or sci-fi for short. Science fiction, like most fiction, tells a story that came from the author's imagination. But what makes it different from other kinds of fiction? Science fiction contains unreal things that could be real in our world in the future. The unreal things in science fiction could be those amazing spaceships or robots or aliens or time machines or any other kind of technology or discovery that just maybe, possibly could happen. A lot of imagination goes into writing science fiction and building a world of possibilities. That's why it's so fun to read. Science fiction often explores what happens when things go wrong with those tools or advancements. It's cool to build rockets and explore outer space, but what if the aliens we meet aren't so friendly? Sci-fi can help us think about the many different outcomes of our actions. Most science fiction takes place in the real world, or at least in a world with similar rules to ours. Sci-fi books have amazing, inventive things in them, but those things play by the rules of our world, of what we know and really experience. In other words, cool stuff happens because of science, not magic. If someone can turn invisible in a science fiction book, it's because they built a light-refracting hologram projection device, not just because they drank an enchanted potion. Science fiction is typically set in the future. Now, the future could be the next century or the next day, but in the imagined future, there's a technology or a scientific discovery that makes things possible that would be impossible in the present. Of course, some science fiction can be set in the present, in an alternative but familiar world. There's even subgenres of sci-fi that are set in the past, like steampunk, where advanced technologies are imagined to exist in a time before electricity. When you get into genre study, you have to remember that there's always an exception to every rule. Genres get mixed up and remixed all the time, and that makes it fun. So that's science fiction. It's full of unreal things that could be real in our world or a similar world in the near or distant future. Sci-fi authors write about what if and what could be, and that can help us think about what's happening right now and how our choices affect the future and the world and the elseworlds beyond the multiverse. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff you're going to read in science fiction, so get used to it. It's awesome.
All right, now that the video is done, take a minute and answer the question, what is genre? That's right. Genre is another name for a category people put stories in. Sometimes stories don't fit very easily or neatly into the categories that people assign them. Let's try to answer the second question now. What is fiction? That's right. Fiction is simply just made-up stories. Now let's answer the third question. What is science fiction? Science fiction is a category of fiction that imagines things that could be possible either in the future or if certain technology existed, and that's opposed to fantasy stories where magic and supernatural usually exist. So, what is unique about the setting in a science fiction story? Let's write that question down. What is unique about the setting in a science fiction story? Do you remember anything about the time or the place? Science fiction stories are typically set in the future, in space, or maybe in a different dimension. What is unique about the characters in science fiction stories? Let's write that question down too. The characters in science fiction could be aliens, scientists, robots, zombies, or even genetically modified cockroaches. What is unique about the technology in science fiction? Science fiction has things like space travel or travel through time or intelligent robots. So now that we know what science fiction is, the main question on your mind is probably, why should you care about science fiction? And the next couple of videos and slides is devoted to answering that question. So to get us started with the answer to that question, I want you to think about Janelle Monáe. Just a few short years ago, Janelle Monáe was herself a student at a KCK high school. Today she's a singer and an actor. The picture here is from the movie Hidden Figures. As you watch the video, the following video, keep in mind that the question we're working on is why should you care about science fiction? To help you answer that question, think about the ways that science fiction inspires Janelle Monáe and what she has envisioned with science fiction.
Afrofuturism is an innovative, ever-shifting cultural movement that goes back more than 60 years. Most date its origins back to experimental jazz legend Sun Ra in the 1950s, but the movement didn't have a name until 1994. That's when Mark Derry used the term in his essay, Black to the Future. Most mainstream sci-fi imaginations of the future are white, and Afrofuturism is a response to this. It strives to imagine the place that people of color will hold in the decades and centuries to come. Dozens of artists have played in this space over the years, but right now few people are doing it as well as Janelle Monáe. Since 2007, Janelle Monáe has been working on an ongoing music concept series called Metropolis. In her 2003 debut, The Audition, she started to hint at the saga, but the suite really began with her first EP, Metropolis Suite 1, The Chase. The story continued through both 2010's The Archandroid and 2013's The Electric Lady. Set in a distant future, Monáe plays Cindy Mayweather, an escaped android who falls in love with a human. Throughout the loose plotline, Mayweather becomes a messianic figure, providing hope for the downtrodden against the Great Divide, a secret society who have been using time travel to suppress freedom and love throughout the ages. Besides being insanely funky and catchy, the entire suite is packed to the brim with social messages. In an interview with Elle, Monáe addressed the most obvious allegory in her story: androids as a metaphor for people of color. The android is just another way of speaking of the new other, and I consider myself to be part of the other just by being a woman and being black, she said. There are all kinds of parallels between androids and the black experience. The suite talks about androids being bought and sold as slaves, and in that world android love is treated like interracial love once was. Androids are even seen to be hypersexualized, much like people of color have been throughout history. While this allegory is interesting, it's only the beginning in a suite full of complex defiance and symbolism. One of the key themes of Afrofuturism is the question of the past and future of black culture. Mark Derry posed an important question in Black to the Future. Can a community whose past has been deliberately rubbed out imagine possible futures? This theme is reflected through the Great Divide in Metropolis. They literally erase past history and culture, just like what Derry talks about in his essay. Monáe's response to this erasure is to set herself up as a time-traveling rebel. By providing hope and resistance for all oppressed peoples in the past, Monáe can help them build a brighter future. My favorite expression of Monáe's Afrofuturism comes out with her use of dance. In Forms of Future, Past Afrofuturism and the Visual Technologies of Resistance, John Jennings noted that Afrofuturism often views everything as a type of technology. While androids and time travel are technology, so are the very social structures around us. Coming from a perspective of oppression, black artists have been able to see how the oppressors have wielded technologies of all forms. Through this lens, we can look at dance as part of Cindy Mayweather's technological toolkit. It's an active form of defiance against an oppressive ruler, and a tool that's used to unite and celebrate.
So take a minute and try to answer that question, what is science fiction good for? Now let's take a look at what you wrote initially, what you wrote before we started, and then think about what we've learned about science fiction. Science fiction is a way to reimagine the future. It's a way to think about how we can reshape the future and make a better world than the one we have now, or at least avoid making things worse. So, thank you for listening.